My name is Elias Vance, and I believe every broken thing deserves a chance to run again. I'm 36 years old, and I've been turning wrenches since before I could legally drive. I took over Vance's garage from my old man when he decided his heart couldn't handle another brutal Milwaukee winter. He was a smart man. He left me a decent business and a single piece of advice that stuck to my ribs like grease to a worn-out rag. Fix what's broken, Elias, but know when something's beyond repair. I live by that philosophy. Whether I'm rebuilding a transmission or navigating the stripped-down chassis of my personal life, that rule holds true. The shop sits on Commerce Street, a brick-and-mortar testament to 3 generations of Vances, sandwiched between Kowalski's Deli, which still uses my grandfather's recipe for pickles, and a pawn shop that's changed hands 6 times in the last 10 years. Nothing flashy about Vance's garage. Just honest work, fair prices, and coffee strong enough to raise the dead. Most folks in Green Bay know they can count on me to diagnose their troubles and give it to them straight. No sugarcoating, no unnecessary upsells. My personal life runs simpler than a '92 Corolla, divorced 2 years back. Brenda decided she wanted excitement, and apparently, a mechanic who came home exhausted and smelling of motor oil didn't qualify. I can't say I blame her. We split amicably enough. No kids to complicate things, thank God. Now I've got a 1-bedroom apartment above Gus's Tavern, which means I never lack for entertainment or the dull ache of regret come closing time. Routine keeps me sane. Up at 5:30, black coffee, check the news, at the shop by 7, work until the light fails or the last customer leaves, whichever comes first. Evenings involve leftover pizza, Brewers games on the radio, and the occasional beer with Gus himself. It's simple, it's predictable, and it's exactly how I like it. Until that Tuesday evening, when simplicity took a header off a cliff. I just finished wrestling with a stubborn transmission on a Chevy Silverado when I spotted her on Elm Street as I was heading home. A white sedan, hood up, hazards blinking like a mechanical SOS. The woman standing beside it looked ready to negotiate with either God or the devil, whichever one might get her engine running. There was a quiet desperation in her stance that I recognized. It was the look of someone whose day had just gone from bad to worse. I pulled my F-150 up behind her car and climbed out, wiping my hands on the ever-present rag in my back pocket. The air was cool, carrying the first hints of a Wisconsin autumn. "Afternoon, ma'am," I said, my voice a little rough from a day of not using it much. "Sounds like you're having some automotive disagreements." She turned, and for a second, I just stood there staring. Auburn hair was escaping from a messy ponytail. A simple green cardigan was pulled tight over dark jeans, and her eyes were the color of storm clouds gathering over Lake Michigan. But what struck me wasn't just that she was beautiful. It was the way she held herself like someone who'd learned to expect disappointment, but hadn't quite given up fighting it. A familiar kind of strength. "It just died," she said, gesturing helplessly at the silent engine. Her voice was steady, but frayed around the edges. Middle of the road, no warning. 1 minute I'm driving, the next I'm having a one-sided conversation with a car that won't talk back. I couldn't help but grin. Well, that's where I come in. I speak fluent automobile. I leaned in, the familiar scent of hot metal and oil a comfort. I started my examination, a ritual I could perform in my sleep. Check the obvious culprits first. Battery connections, belts, fluids, everything looked normal. Then I got out my multimeter and tested the starter relay. Dead as disco. "Your starter relay's fried," I announced, straightening up. "Easy fix, but you'll need a tow." She sighed, a sound heavy with resignation, and ran a hand through her hair. "Of course, Island. How much are we talking for the relay?" "The part's cheap, $20 maybe. The tow and labor, probably another 60. I wiped my hands again, a nervous habit. "I can call Jimmy's Towing for you. Or, if you trust a complete stranger, I can haul you to my shop just down the road. Won't charge you for the tow." Her eyebrows rose in surprise. "That's generous of a complete stranger." "Well, I prefer mysteriously charitable stranger," I said with a shrug. "Sounds more intriguing." That earned me a genuine laugh, a bright, clear sound that cut through the evening air. It was the first one I'd heard from her, and it hit me in the chest harder than I expected. "Okay, mysteriously charitable stranger," she said, her eyes crinkling at the corners. "I'm Clara, and I accept your offer." "Elias," I said, extending a hand. She shook without hesitation. Her grip was firm. "And you've made the right choice. My shop's got the best coffee in a 6-block radius." 20 minutes later, we were at Vance's garage. Clara watched me hook up her sedan, my movements efficient and careful. I've always found that people judge you based on how you handle their belongings, especially when those belongings are expensive and essential to their daily lives. I'll have the part tomorrow morning, I told her as I finished securing the car. Should be ready by noon. She nodded, then hesitated, biting her lip. Would you mind if I bought you dinner as a thank you for stopping? There's a place called Antonio's just down the street. Now, I'm not typically the type to accept invitations from women I've just met. Too many variables, too much potential for complications I wasn't equipped to handle. My life was a well-oiled machine, and I didn't need any foreign debris gumming up the works. But something about Clara made me curious. Maybe it was the way she'd laughed, or how she hadn't flinched when I'd wiped motor oil on my jeans. Maybe it was the storm clouds in her eyes that I felt a strange urge to see clear. Antonio's makes a decent lasagna, I said, surprising myself. Lead the way. Dinner turned into 3 hours of easy conversation. Clara Monroe worked as a librarian at the downtown branch, had lived in Green Bay for 8 years, loved mystery novels, and hated romantic comedies. She asked intelligent questions about my work, seeming genuinely interested in the mechanics of automotive repair. She didn't talk down to me or treat my profession as some blue-collar curiosity. What she didn't mention was the thin gold band she still wore on her left ring finger, or why she lived alone in a house she described that was clearly meant for 2 people. I didn't ask. I learned from Brenda that some questions are like loose bolts on an engine block. You don't tighten them until you're ready to deal with what might leak out. When I walked her to her door later that night, she paused on the porch steps. The light from her doorway cast a warm glow around her. Thank you again, Elias, for everything. Just doing my job, I said, though we both knew stopping for stranded motorists wasn't technically part of my job description. She smiled, a small, tired curve of her lips. She unlocked her door, then turned back to me. The coffee really is excellent, by the way. Told you. I drove home that night with the radio off, the silence in my truck filled with thoughts of storm cloud eyes and the way some people carry their stories like carefully guarded secrets. The next morning, I had Clara's car running smooth as silk before my second cup of coffee. New relay installed, battery tested, all fluids topped off. I'd even run it through the car wash down the street, though I'd only charge her for the mechanical work. It was a small gesture, one I couldn't quite explain to myself. She arrived just after noon, walking through the bay doors like she belonged there. Today she wore a blue dress that made her eyes look less like a storm and more like a clear sky after the rain. Over it, she had a leather jacket that had seen better decades but suited her perfectly. "How's my patient, Doc?" she asked, approaching her car with the cautious hope of someone who'd been disappointed by mechanics before. "Clean bill of health," I said, handing her the keys. "Should run for another 100,000 miles with proper maintenance." She slipped behind the wheel and turned the ignition. The engine purred to life immediately, a satisfying steady hum. "Elias, you're a miracle worker," she said, climbing back out. "What do I owe you?" I handed her the bill. Parts and labor. Nothing fancy. She studied it, then looked up at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "This seems low." "It's fair. You could have charged me twice this." "I could have," I agreed. "But then I'd have to look at myself in the mirror every morning, and I've got enough problems with that as it island." She laughed again. That same genuine sound that had caught my attention the day before. "Well, let me at least buy you lunch." "You don't owe me anything, Clara." "Oh, one. I know," she said simply, "but I'd like to anyway." This time, we went to Gus's tavern. Gus himself was working the bar, a mountain of a man with forearms like tree trunks and a philosophy degree from Marquette that he'd never used for anything except winning bar arguments. "Elias," he boomed as we entered. "And who's this lovely lady?" "Clara. Meet Gus." "Gus, don't embarrass me." "Wouldn't dream of it," Gus said with a grin that suggested exactly the opposite. "Clara, you should know this man once fixed my delivery truck with nothing but duct tape and a sheer force of will." "That sounds about right," Clara said, sliding onto a bar stool with a smile. We ordered burgers and talked about everything except the important stuff. Her past, my divorce, the careful way she avoided mentioning anyone significant in her life. Instead, we discussed books, shared funny customer stories, and debated the Packers' chances this season. It was easy, too easy. 3 days later, my phone buzzed. It was Clara. "My kitchen faucet is dripping," she said, and I could hear the smile in her voice. "And I heard you were handy with more than just cars. Would you mind taking a look?" I arrived at her house that evening with a toolbox and a six-pack of beer. The place was exactly what I'd expected. A craftsman bungalow with a wraparound porch, a well-maintained garden, and the kind of attention to detail that suggested someone who took pride in their home. The kitchen faucet was indeed dripping, but it was a simple washer replacement, a 10-minute job, tops. As I worked, Clara moved around the kitchen preparing dinner, and I caught myself watching her efficient, graceful movements. It became a pattern. A week later, a floorboard on her porch was squeaking. The week after that, a hinge on her bedroom door needed oiling. Each time, she'd call with a new, minor domestic crisis. And each time, I'd show up with my tools, knowing damn well this wasn't about the repairs. These were petty reasons, flimsy excuses to bridge the gap between her world and mine. I never called her on it. I understood the language of excuses. They were a way of asking for something without the risk of being told no. And with every visit, I learned a little more. I saw the photograph on the mantel she'd turned face down. I noticed the wedding ring had migrated from her left hand to her right. I saw the deep sadness that would sometimes flicker in her eyes when she thought I wasn't looking. We were building something, slowly and carefully, like assembling a complex engine. Each conversation was a bolt tightened, each shared meal a gasket sealed. We were building trust, one petty reason at a time. Both of us too broken to rush. Both of us knowing that if you force the pieces together, you'll only strip the threads. November brought a cold snap that bit deep into the bones of the city. The wind howled off the lake, and the first flakes of snow began to fall. Life had settled into a new kind of routine, one that included Clara. The petty reasons had become less frequent, replaced by simple invitations. Dinner, a movie, a walk by the frozen lake shore. We were orbiting each other, getting closer with each rotation, but never quite making contact. The unspoken things her late husband, my failed marriage, hung in the air between us like the frost on my truck's windshield. Then, on a Thursday afternoon, the crisis came. And this time, it was real. My phone rang at the shop. It was Clara, her voice tight with a controlled panic that immediately put me on high alert. "Elias, I hate to bother you at work, but my heat's not working. The house is freezing." "On my way," I said, already shrugging off my greasy coveralls and reaching for my coat. I found her bundled in sweaters and blankets, her breath visible in the cold air of her own living room. The house felt like an icebox. The furnace was old, probably installed when the house was built, and after 20 minutes of examination in the drafty basement, I found the problem. The heat exchanger had a hairline crack. It wasn't just broken, it was dangerous, leaking carbon monoxide. The whole unit needed to be replaced. "How long?" she asked, hugging herself for warmth as I came back upstairs. "A few days to get the part, another day to install. This weekend at the earliest," I said, hating the dismay that washed over her face. I could see her mentally calculating the cost of a hotel during the pre-holiday tourist season. "You'll stay with me," I said. It wasn't a question. "Elias, I can't. I couldn't impose." "Sure you can," I cut her off gently. "My place has heat, a decent bed, and I make passable coffee. Besides," I added with a grin, trying to lighten the mood, "I'm pretty sure my couch is more comfortable than Gus's guest room." That first night, she insisted on sleeping on my couch, despite my protests that she should take the bed. My apartment, which had always felt perfectly functional for one person, suddenly seemed small and inadequate. It was a space designed for solitude, not for sharing. I woke around midnight to a noise from the living room. I found her shivering under the thin blanket I'd provided, her teeth chattering softly. "Clara," I said, shaking her gently awake. "You're freezing." "I'm fine," she mumbled, her words slurred with sleep, clearly not fine at all. "Come on." I helped her up, her body trembling against mine. I led her to my bedroom. "Take the bed. I'll sleep on the couch." "Don't be ridiculous." She was more awake now, her storm cloud eyes serious in the dim light from the hallway. "The bed's big enough for both of us. We're adults." She was right, of course. But as I lay beside her that first night, careful to stay on my side of the mattress, I was acutely aware of everything. The scent of her shampoo on the pillow, the soft sound of her breathing, every small movement she made in her sleep. It was both a quiet torture and the most profoundly content I'd felt in years. My carefully constructed, predictable world had been invaded, and I found I didn't want her to leave. The furnace could stay broken for a week, for all I cared. For the first time since the divorce, My apartment felt less like a place to sleep and more like a place someone might want to come home to. The next morning, I woke to the smell of bacon and coffee. For a moment, disoriented, I thought I was back in a life I'd left behind 2 years ago. Then I saw Clara standing at my small stove, wearing one of my old flannel shirts over her jeans, humming softly to herself. Her hair was messy from sleep, and she looked so perfectly, naturally at home in my kitchen, that something inside my chest squeezed tight and didn't let go. "Morning," she said, turning to smile at me. "Hope you don't mind. I raided your fridge." "Not at all," I managed, moving to pour myself coffee, deliberately brushing against her as I reached for a mug. She didn't step away. We fell into a comfortable domestic rhythm. The furnace part was delayed, a fact neither of us seemed too upset about. Her toothbrush found a home next to mine in the bathroom cabinet. Her mystery novels started to colonize my nightstand. My morning routine expanded to include making coffee for two. Christmas was just a few weeks away. It was a holiday I'd come to dread, a stark reminder of forced family gatherings and the empty space where traditions used to be. But Clara insisted on getting a real tree. "It's not Christmas without the smell of pine," she declared. We spent an entire Saturday morning at the tree farm, debating the merits of various evergreens while snow fell gently around us. We finally settled on a Douglas fir that was at least 2 feet too tall for my apartment ceiling. "We'll make it work," she'd said with a determined glint in her eye. And we did. I trimmed the bottom while she dug through boxes of ornaments she'd retrieved from her house. Each decoration had a story. The wooden angel her grandmother had carved. The glittery snowflake from her first apartment. I watched as she unwrapped the last one, her movements slow and deliberate. It was a silly-looking ceramic reindeer, slightly chipped on one antler. Her face softened with a memory that was both sweet and painful. "You okay?" I asked quietly. She nodded, not looking at me. "Leo bought this," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "During our last Christmas together." She hung the final ornament carefully on a prominent branch, her expression a mixture of love and loss. The air grew heavy with the presence of the man I'd never met. Instead of ignoring it, I reached out and put my hand on her shoulder. She stepped back to survey our handiwork, the tree lights reflecting in her tear-filled eyes. "It feels right, having them here, like the past and the present can coexist." Later that evening, we sat in the dark living room with only the tree lights glowing, drinking wine and listening to old Christmas carols. Clara was curled against my side, tracing patterns on my chest with her finger. "Do you think Leo would approve?" she asked. The question so vulnerable it almost broke my heart. I considered it seriously, thinking about the man I knew only from a few faded photographs. He had kind eyes and an easy smile. He had clearly adored her. "I think," I said carefully, choosing my words like I was choosing the right socket for a delicate bolt, "that anyone who loved you would want you to be happy. And I think he'd approve of someone who treats you like you deserve to be treated." She lifted her head to look at me, and the smile she gave me was worth more than any gift I'd ever receive. "You always know the right thing to say." "Not always," I admitted, "but I try." She kissed me then, soft and grateful. In the glow of the Christmas lights, with the ghosts of our past lingering gently in the room, I realized we weren't just decorating a tree. We were building a new tradition, one that had space for all the broken pieces of who we used to be. In March, after the last of the snow had melted away, Clara asked me to visit her at the library. "There's something I want to show you," she'd said over breakfast, her eyes sparkling with an excitement I loved to see. "Plus, I think it's time you met my other world." The Green Bay Public Library was a beautiful old Carnegie building, all high ceilings and tall windows that filled the space with golden afternoon light. It was a world away from the grease and noise of my garage. Clara led me through the main reading room to a smaller room in the back, unlocking a glass door with a set of keys from her pocket. "This is the local history archive," she explained, her voice filled with pride. "It's my special project." Inside, the room was lined with filing cabinets, old photographs, and box after box of documents. It smelled like old paper and lavender. She moved through the space with an obvious passion, pulling out manila folders and leather-bound volumes. "Look at this," she said, opening a thick album filled with photographs of Green Bay from the 1920 seconds. She showed me a wall map covered in colored pins, marking historic buildings. My eyes scanned the map and stopped on a familiar street. "Vance's garage is marked here," I said, a smile spreading across my face. "I know. I've been researching it." She pulled out a file folder with my family's name on it. Your grandfather opened the garage in 1952. Before that, the building was a blacksmith shop run by a man named Henryk Kowalski, probably related to the deli owner next door. She showed me old photographs of the building, newspaper clippings about my grandfather's business, even his original business license application. I felt something tighten in my chest as I looked at pictures of a younger version of my father working alongside his own dad, their hands calloused and capable. I was looking at my own history, a story I knew by heart but had never seen laid out with such care. Why did you do all this? I asked, my voice thick. Clara closed the folder gently. Because it's your history, Ilias. Because the people we love should know where they come from. Just then, a stern-looking, silver-haired woman appeared in the doorway. Clara, you know the archives aren't supposed to be used for personal... She stopped when she saw me. Oh, I didn't realize you had a visitor. Clara introduced me to her supervisor, Margaret Patterson. The woman's expression shifted when she heard my name. Reed? As in Vance's garage? Your father fixed my car for 20 years. An honest man. After she left, Clara sighed. She's not happy about the archive project. Says it's not a priority, that we should focus on digital resources instead. She wants to box everything up and put it in storage. I could see the disappointment in her eyes. This place, these stories, they mattered to her. That evening, I couldn't stop thinking about those photographs, about my grandfather's hands, about Clara's passion for preserving stories that would otherwise be lost. My father's words echoed in my head. Fix what's broken. The next Saturday morning, I showed up at the library's employee entrance with my toolbox. Clara met me, looking confused. Elias, what are you doing here? I'm here to fix something, I said, gesturing toward the archive room. You said Miss Patterson thinks the archive isn't modern enough, so let's make it modern. Over the next month, we spent every Saturday morning upgrading the archive room. I installed better lighting, built custom shelving units that maximized the space, and set up a small work area with a scanner and a computer. Clara organized everything with the efficiency of a master librarian. We were a team. My practical skills and her passionate vision came together perfectly. What had been a cramped, dusty storage room became a proper research center, professional and inviting. Miss Patterson started coming around. The board approved funding to keep it going and even expand it. Watching Clara lead a workshop on genealogy a few months later, I felt a pride that had nothing to do with the shelves I'd built. She hadn't just been preserving history in that room, she'd been creating a space for new stories to begin, including ours. She was teaching me that some things aren't meant to be fixed and left alone. They're meant to be cared for, built upon, and shared. Spring bled into a warm, green summer. Clara's temporary stay at my apartment had become a permanent one without either of us ever formally acknowledging it. Her clothes were in the closet, her favorite mug was always clean, and the silence I used to find comforting now felt empty whenever she wasn't there. We had built a life in my small apartment, a life that was beginning to feel too big for the space. The future arrived, as it always does, in the form of a certified letter. Clara's lease was up for renewal in May. The conversation we'd been avoiding could no longer be put off. We were walking through the park near her old house one evening, the air thick with the scent of cut grass and blooming lilacs. The setting sun painted the sky in shades of orange and pink. I could renew for another year, she said, her voice casual, but I could hear the question hanging underneath it. You could, I agreed, keeping my own voice neutral. She stopped walking and turned to face me, her expression serious. Or I could officially move in with you. Not just because my furnace broke or my lease is up, but because I want to build a life with you, Alias. My heart hammered against my ribs. It was the question and the statement I'd wanted for months, but had been too afraid to ask, too afraid to hope for. I, Elias Vance, the man who lived by routine and avoided complications, had found the one complication I couldn't imagine living without. Is that what you want? I asked, needing to hear it again. It's what I've wanted for months, she admitted, a slight blush coloring her cheeks. I just wasn't sure if you felt the same way. I cupped her face in my hands, my calloused thumbs stroking her soft skin. I looked directly into those storm cloud eyes that had captivated me from the very beginning, only now they held no trace of a storm, only a clear, deep certainty. Clara, the day your car broke down was the luckiest day of my life, I said, the words feeling truer than anything I'd ever said. I can't imagine going back to the way things were before you. I took a deep breath. So yes, I want you to move in. I want your books on my shelves and your coffee mug in my sink, and your terrible taste in movies cluttering up my Netflix queue. She laughed, tears of happiness streaming down her cheeks. My taste in movies is not terrible. It's absolutely terrible, I said, pulling her into a hug. And I love it. It wasn't a proposal sealed with a ring or a promise made before a crowd. It was something quieter, stronger. It was a commitment made between two people who understood what it meant to be broken and had decided together that they were worth fixing. It was a promise without a lease, a foundation built not on paper, but on shared mornings, late-night talks, and the unspoken understanding that we were finally, truly home. 1 year to the day after our first meeting, on a crisp Tuesday evening in October, I was closing up the shop when Clara walked in. She was carrying a picnic basket and wearing a dress I'd never seen before, a deep blue that matched the evening sky. "Going somewhere special?" I asked, wiping my hands clean on a rag. "We are," she said with a mysterious smile. "Change of plans. You're not cooking tonight." "Oh, really? And what makes you think I'm available for mysterious dinner dates?" She walked right up to me and straightened the collar of my work shirt with the practiced familiarity of someone who had been doing it for months. "Because I called Gus, and he said you've been moping around all day, checking your phone every 5 minutes." "I don't mope." You absolutely mope," she said, her eyes twinkling. "It's actually quite endearing." She led me to her car, the same white sedan I'd fixed that first day, now running smoothly with regular maintenance and my careful attention. We drove to the lake, to a small bluff overlooking the water where she'd already set up a blanket and battery-powered lanterns. "What's the occasion?" I asked, as we settled onto the blanket. "Does there need to be one?" She unpacked the basket, sandwiches, fruit, a bottle of wine, and chocolate chip cookies that I knew she'd made from scratch. We ate and talked and watched the sun set over Green Bay. As darkness settled around us, a comfortable and complete blanket, Clara moved closer, leaning her head against my shoulder. "Elias," she said softly. "Yeah? I have something for you." She reached into the pocket of her dress and pulled out a small, wrapped box. My stomach jumped. It was too small to be anything but jewelry, too carefully wrapped to be casual. My mind raced. "It's not what you think," she said quickly, seeing the look on my face. "Open it." I carefully unwrapped the paper. Inside, nestled on a bed of cotton, was a key. A simple brass key, newly cut. "It's to my house," she said, her voice steady. "I know we've been living together in your apartment, but my house, it has that workshop space in the basement you've been wanting. And the garden you pretend not to care about, but I've seen you looking at." I turned the key over in my palm, feeling its solid weight. "I'm not asking you to give up your apartment or make any big decisions tonight," she continued, her words echoing a sentiment she'd expressed months ago in a different context. "I'm just saying that if you want a home that's truly ours, not just yours with my stuff in it, or mine with yours, then maybe we could make that happen." I looked up from the key to her face, illuminated by the soft glow of the lanterns. There was one last ghost to address, one last piece that needed to be put in its proper place. "And what about Leo?" I asked quietly. She didn't flinch. She simply looked at me with a love so profound it took my breath away. "Leo will always be part of my story," she said simply, "but he doesn't get to write the ending. We do." I leaned forward and kissed her, tasting wine and possibility, and the promise of a future we would build together, bolt by bolt, memory by memory. "Yes," I said against her lips. "Yes to the house. Yes to the workshop. Yes to pretending I don't care about your garden while secretly learning the names of all your plants." She laughed, that beautiful, clear sound that had started it all. "Really?" "Really. On one condition." "What's that?" "We keep the apartment too, for backup. And because Gus would never forgive me if I moved out completely." "Deal," she whispered. We packed up the picnic and drove back to her house, our house, in comfortable silence. As I stood on the porch, I slid the new key into the lock. It turned smoothly. I pushed the door open and stood on the threshold. Clara slipped her hand into mine. "Welcome home, Elias," she said softly. I squeezed her hand, a feeling of rightness settling deep in my soul. "I've been home for months," I replied. "I just didn't have the key to prove it. Some people believe in destiny, others in luck. I believe in second chances and broken starters, and the simple willingness to stop your truck for a stranger in distress. Mostly, I believe that sometimes the most important fixing you can do isn't on engines or faucets or furnaces. It's on hearts that have learned to trust again, on lives that have found a new purpose, and on a love that proves itself stronger than loss. Clara taught me that home isn't a place you inherit or rent or buy. It's something you build, day by day, choice by careful choice, with someone who sees you clearly, all the cracked parts and worn out pieces, and loves you anyway. And that, I've learned, is the most honest work of all.